All right, my friends, welcome back. This is going to be part 23 of my presentation on the flood in Noah's Ark. And in this one here, we're going to be looking at a question that some folks will say, how did these animals get to these continents after the flood? After the flood, they get off Noah's Ark and they go wandering around the planet. And, you can only go so far on certain continents and then you come across water. How did they get to each of the continents? And so that is a very good question. And so, and I'm going to throw some ideas at you. One of the ways is that they were brought. They were brought. You can bring animals to one continent to another, and that's how we get animals here. Sometimes they make certain laws against that. Because you got certain type of animals or insects or just certain types of even plant life, which they consider to be invasive, and they can be quite damaging to a certain area of the world. I know where I live at. Somebody has planted. One of my neighbors, I know who he is. He's now deceased, but he planted what's called running bamboo in the back of his yard. And now that was all good for him when he was alive. He could keep that running bamboo in his own backyard. But when he died, his wife didn't know how to take care of them things. And the thing with running bamboo is it's considered an invasive species, and it's extremely hard to kill, and it grows about 2 feet a day. It's extremely fast growing, and it can destroy a yard. And so, and I'm battling with it now. It's now has come over to my yard, and I'm battling that stuff like crazy, and it is a mess. And so, at the time of this recording, I'm hoping to be able to clear out that stuff, and eventually it'll just die off because I'm hoping to keep it from photosynthesizing. And so, but the running bamboo is an extremely fast growing, and it can send roots under the ground 25 feet out and then start popping up. So you really don't know where the thing is going to come up at. It's like an alien from another planet. And so, but that's the reason why certain laws are made. And so some of these plant life is just quite amazing. And that's the same with some of the insects. But another way is that a lot of scientists believe, Christian and secular scientists believe, that at one point in time, our oceans were much lower than they are now. From the literature that I've been able to read, it's an average of about 300 feet lower than they are today. And so now if you was to lower the water between the continents 300 feet, you're going to come across some natural land bridges that these animals could cross to get from one continent to another continent. And so Wrangel Island, way up in the north, where the mammoths have gotten trapped on Wrangel Island. That was one of the theories on how those animals got there to begin with. The waters were much lower, especially if you notice on this chart here. This is a chart that you'll see me show from time to time. You've got going at the top, at the biblical worldview, you've got the flood happening about 4,400 years ago. And then right after that, a large portion of creationists, not everybody, but a large portion of creationists believe that the ice age happened right at the end of the flood. It took 700 years. It was 700 years duration after the flood. You got 500 years to form and then 200 years to melt back. And so during that 500 years to form, the waters were much lower across the planet, an average of about, let's just say 300 feet. And then whenever the ice melted, started melting, then the sea waters, the ocean waters started rising during that 200 years of meltback, and then that's where they started rising up until we have it today. And so, there's a large portion of the floodwaters that flooded this planet that are on the north and south poles. They're frozen there. And so, that's another theory. Now, another idea I'm going to throw out at you is the floating islands. The floating islands. It's really just amazing when you get to looking into these things. But if you'll notice on the screen here, I'm going to give you some information that I have found about what's called floating islands. Floating islands. It says there are many log mats. Now, we've talked about log mats. If y'all remember the previous videos when I was giving you the transport theory, there were these huge log mats that you would have after a catastrophe like Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. And then not only that, but then, of course, the biblical flood. Just think how many millions upon millions of trees that could be floating in giant log mats. And so, but if you think now going back to that Mount St. Helens, that happened in 1980, but in 2012, guys, there's still giant log mats still floating around in Spirit Lake. And so now today, 2024, I'm not sure how many they have there. Probably a good portion of them are still floating around. But that's a long time after 1980. They're still floating around. And so, but again, that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of throwing this out on how some animals could have gotten from one continent to another continent. And it's really quite amazing. But at any rate, it says there are many log mats or floating islands today. Some have growing vegetation, including trees and sometimes supporting animals. Loktak Lake in northeast India has many natural floating islands called, I'm going to try this, I'm going to say it's fundas, with some small ones built for fishing. The fishermen catch about 15 tons. 15 tons, guys. That's 6.6 million pounds of fish every year. There is a school on one of the floating islands. If you'll notice that picture down below, check that out, guys. That right there is a floating island, believe it or not. These circular land masses are made of vegetation, soil, and organic matter at different stages of decomposition, and that have been thickened into a solid form. The islands have a spongy surface that feels like a trampoline. Like an iceberg, most of the mass of the fundas lies below the water surface. During the dry season, when the water levels drop, the living roots of the islands can reach the lake bed and absorb nutrients. I mean, that's just fascinating to me. I think that's just fascinating. And then, of course, when the waters come back, they just raise up. So they're able to get nutrients at certain times of the year to keep these plant life alive. I think that's just absolutely incredible. Anyway, going on, the fundas, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, guys, but that's the way I'm going to pronounce it. But at any rate, support around 200 species of aquatic plants and 400 species of animals, including the rare Indian python. The largest island is home to the, I'm not going to try that, but it's Keibul Lamjao, Lamjao, the world's only floating national park. Get that, guys. The world's only floating national park. It serves as a habitat for the endangered brow-antlered sangai. Or a dancing deer, whose hooves have adapted to the island's spongy ground. The park, covering, get this, guys, 15 square miles. 15 square miles. This is a floating island. Was specifically created to preserve the deer. which were once thought to be extinct. The habitat is composed of floating meadows and a raised strip of hard ground that separates the park into northern and southern zones. The construction of the, I would say, Enthai Dam in the 1980s, built to provide power for India's northeast states, has threatened the life of the islands, these floating islands. The dam south of Loktak Lake has caused water levels to remain high year-round, preventing these islands from sinking and reaching the lake bed for nutrients. As a result, these islands are slowly thinning and are starting to break apart. So get that. Okay, going on, it says Van Duzer points out, to those not acquainted with them, floating islands usually seem at first like a myth, a paradox, or an impossibility. Surely chunks of the solid and massy earth on which we stand cannot drift easily about on the surface of a body of water. Yet, floating islands exist on at least, get this, 6 of the 7 continents, and sometimes in the oceans that separate them. They may have trees growing on them, be hundreds of meters. Now, this is 1 meter is a little over 3 feet. So hundreds of meters across, that's pretty good size, and support the weight, get this, a weight of 100 cattle grazing on them. That is absolutely just amazing. Now, if you'll notice that picture right there at the bottom of this, you can see those little green dots. Now, I'm going to show you a close-up of that. Here we go. Now, if you'll notice, all these little green dots in the water, those are floating islands. Those are floating islands, guys. And so that is absolutely just amazing. And so we're going to stop right there. This has been a shorter video than the other ones, but this is just a proposed theory that a possibility how some animals possibly could have gotten from one continent to another. If you're having this floating island, if it gets close to, let's just say, one of the continents, and the animals were able to get on top of it, just like some of the information I just gave you, some of these floating islands are big enough to sustain 100 cattle. 100 cattle. They're able to get on it, graze it, and live on these things. And so, and just like in India, they built a school on one. And so, but that is a possibility how some animals got from one continent to another. It's just another thing. So you've got the low waters after the flood during the ice age. Animals could have gotten to one area to another. And so through land bridges or just swimming, maybe the water was just so low they could swim to a certain portion and then get up on these continents. They were taken, maybe on boats and stuff like that. They were taken by man, and then these floating islands here. That's another way that they could have gotten from one area to another area. And so, but floating islands are just amazing. I think it's incredible what these things are. And so, but other than that, guys, we're going to stop right there. When we come back, our next video, we're going to continue on with Antarctica and some of the things that were found. We're going to get into some of the animals that were found on Antarctica. That's just amazing. And again, some of the theories on how those animals got to Antarctica. You know, and we're gonna briefly go over Antarctica again, kind of refresh our memory as far as the climate, and then we're going to go into some of these animals. And so, quite amazing, some interesting things, still yet to come. But you guys take care. I love you, and I hope the Lord blesses you real good. Bye bye.